She swept shell casings off a firing range every morning for 2 years. The SEALs walked past her like she was part of the furniture. Then the base came under attack. Their sniper was down. The mortar rounds were walking closer. And the man in charge of the most lethal precision unit in the Nevada desert turned around, looked at the cleaning woman holding a brass bucket, and handed her his rifle. What happened next left an entire combat unit speechless. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told you didn't belong, this story is for you. Subscribe to the channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The desert didn't care what time it was. It was the same at 4 in the morning as it was at noon, flat, pale, indifferent, smelling faintly of creosote and old cordite. The Nevada high desert had a way of making everything feel temporary. Structures, people, ambitions. Black Ridge Forward Operations Camp sat in the middle of about 40 square miles of nothing, ringed by low ridge lines that turned purple before sunrise and bone white by 10. The kind of place that looked like a mistake on a map. The kind of place that made you wonder who had decided to put something important here, in the middle of all this emptiness. Emily Carter had stopped asking that question around 8 months in. She pulled her truck through the maintenance contractor gate at 0445, the same as every morning. The guard on duty, Specialist Hendricks, 22 years old and perpetually half asleep at that hour, waved her through without looking up from his phone. Her contractor badge was green. Her truck was known. She was known in the way that fixtures are known. You notice when they're missing, never while they're there. The firing range complex occupied the eastern half of the camp, 5 separate lanes running 400 to over 1,000 meters, with a dedicated CQB kill house bolted onto the south end and a covered maintenance corridor running the full length of the east berm. Emily's job was the maintenance corridor. She worked for Apex Range Services, a private contractor that handled range upkeep for 3 installations across Nevada and 2 in Arizona. Her specific role was brass retrieval, target maintenance, lane inspection, and general range housekeeping. In practice, this meant she spent most of her mornings moving slowly down the firing line with a 5-gallon bucket and a magnetic brass picker, collecting spent casings while the world's most expensive shooters trained above her on the elevated platform. She didn't mind. That was the part people never understood. Her supervisor, a retired Army logistics sergeant named Walt Briggs, had asked her once, gently, the way people ask things they think might be rude, whether the work was beneath her. She had a bachelor's degree in environmental science. She had held other jobs. Walt had clearly been expecting her to say yes, to admit she was overqualified and just waiting for something better. "It's honest work," she'd told him. "I like being outside." He had accepted that answer, though she could tell he hadn't entirely believed it. The full truth was something she didn't share with Walt Briggs or anyone else at Black Ridge. She liked being near the shooting. The SEAL sniper element arrived at 0500, same as always. She heard them before she saw them, boots on the elevated platform overhead, the thud and clatter of equipment cases being set down, the clipped, low-key exchange of men who had been working together long enough that full sentences were an inefficiency. They were part of a naval special warfare training rotation, 6 weeks at Black Ridge for advanced precision marksmanship before their next deployment cycle. 8 shooters, 2 spotters, and the instructor who ran the whole program, Chief Petty Officer Mason Cole. Emily had learned his name from the range schedule, not from any introduction. Nobody introduced range maintenance contractors to SEAL instructors. That wasn't how the social architecture of a place like Black Ridge worked. Cole was 38, lean without being thin, with the kind of face that had been outdoors in hard weather for a long time. Not weathered in a romantic way, just worn, like the sole of a good boot. He ran the training block with a controlled intensity that Emily had noticed immediately, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. Other instructors she'd worked around over the years tended to perform their authority. Loud corrections, pointed demonstrations, the cultivated theatrics of men who wanted to be remembered as demanding. Cole didn't perform anything. He just watched. He stood back and watched his shooters the way a serious mechanic watches an engine run, looking for the thing that's slightly off, the sound that shouldn't be there, the vibration that will become a problem. And when he corrected someone, it was quiet. A few words. Sometimes just a repositioning of the shooter's support hand, a small adjustment to their position behind the rifle. Emily had spent 2 months watching Cole before she understood why she found him interesting. He saw things. Not in a mystical sense, he just processed data faster than the people around him and trusted what the data told him. She had realized this on a Tuesday in early November, when she had been working the brass line on Lane 3 during a morning session. The wind that day was coming off the eastern ridge at an angle. Not a clean crosswind, but a swirling, unpredictable thing that changed character every few minutes as the sun warmed the rock face. Two shooters were consistently pulling left, overcorrecting for a wind that had already shifted. Cole had watched two misses, then said something brief to his spotter, who adjusted the wind flag indicators on the lane. Emily, at that moment, had been noting the same thing. She hadn't said anything. It wasn't her place to say anything. She had just kept moving her brass picker down the line, collecting .300 weight casings into her bucket, and watched Cole fix the problem she had already diagnosed from 15 feet lower than him. She didn't think about it again until the following week. It was 06:30 on a Wednesday, overcast and cold, when Cole came down off the platform and walked along the maintenance corridor toward the water station at the south end. Emily was working Section C, crouching to retrieve casings from between two rubber lane dividers. He stopped. She looked up. "Morning," he said. Not unfriendly, just neutral. "Morning," she said. He was quiet for a moment. She thought he was going to keep walking. People almost always kept walking, but he didn't. He was looking at the lane she was working. Specifically, he was looking at the wind flags. "You notice anything about the pattern on lane 4 this morning?" The question landed oddly, not condescending, genuinely curious, the way a person asks when they actually want an answer. Emily looked at lane 4. The flag was sitting at about 7 degrees of deflection, but it was doing something particular, cycling. Every 45 seconds or so, it dropped nearly flat before recovering. She had noticed it at 0515 when she'd arrived. There was a gap in the eastern berm, about 60 meters out, that was channeling a pocket of moving air and releasing it in irregular bursts. "The flag on 4 is cycling," she said. "There's a gap in the berm at the 60-meter mark. Wind's coming through it in pulses. Every 45 seconds or so, maybe 40. Cole looked at the berm, then he looked back at her. "Yeah," he said, "that's exactly what it's doing." He didn't say anything else. He got his water, nodded once in her direction, and went back up to the platform. But Emily noticed, in the days that followed, that he looked her way more often, not conspicuously, not in a way that anyone else would have registered. Just the way a person looks when they've cataloged something they find relevant and are quietly gathering more information. 3 weeks after the berm conversation, Cole came back down the maintenance corridor during a break. He had a green notebook. He was reviewing his wind log from the morning session, times, conditions, corrections, missed data. Emily was patching a target frame at lane 6. He stood nearby for a moment and she assumed he was checking the lane markers. "The two misses on lane 6 at 0720, he said, not looking up from the notebook. "Both pulled right. I had fought a clean crosswind call at that time. What was your read?" Emily stopped working. The direct question surprised her. Not because it was intrusive, it wasn't. Because nobody had ever asked her for a read on anything at Black Ridge. She was the brass girl. Her opinion on ballistics was not a resource anyone had thought to access. She straightened up and looked back toward the downrange markers. "Wind shifted at 071 scene," she said. "The flag caught it. But there was a thermal coming off the dark berm panel. The one they repainted last week, darker color absorbs faster. Created a slight updraft at mid-range. The bullets were drifting into it on the way out. Maybe half a minute of angle pushing right." Cole wrote something in his notebook. "That's exactly what I was seeing," he said. "I couldn't confirm the source." "The panel color," she said. "They should have used lighter paint." "Yeah." He closed the notebook. "They should have." He went back to work. So did she. But something had changed, and they both knew it, even if neither of them said so. The conversations became a quiet routine. Not every day. Not obviously. Just when Cole had a question that the data wasn't fully answering, he would sometimes wander down the maintenance corridor during a break and speak to the woman with the brass bucket. And she would give him an answer, not always the answer he expected, but always a precise one, always grounded in something observable. Wind behavior, mirage, heat signatures off target panels, the way sound was moving that particular morning, which told you things about air density if you'd spent enough time on a range. In early December, she told him that the 2,000-yard lane was consistently producing low impacts after 1,100 hours. And the reason wasn't shooter error. It was air temperature inversion between the range floor and the ridgeline, creating a density layer the bullets were decelerating into. The base's ballistics data hadn't been updated for current elevation and seasonal temperature variation. Cole had his spotter run new environmental data that afternoon. The impacts corrected. Nobody on the platform knew why it had suddenly gotten better. Cole hadn't told anyone where the observation had come from. Emily hadn't expected him to. But one morning in mid-December, after a particularly difficult session in which wind conditions had been genuinely ugly, gusting and unpredictable, the kind of day that humbled good shooters, Cole had come down to the corridor and simply stood next to where she was working. "You know something," he said. "You're calling corrections before Logan does. And Logan is very good." Logan Pierce was Cole's primary spotter. He had 12 years in special operations. His wind calls were as clean as anyone Emily had ever observed. "I pay attention," she said. "No," Cole said. "Paying attention is what my shooters do. What you're doing is different." She didn't answer. "You've shot before," he said. Not an accusation, a statement. The kind a person makes when they've assembled enough evidence and are simply reporting a conclusion. Emily kept her eyes on the brass she was collecting. "A long time ago," she said. "How long?" 12 years. Cole absorbed that. "What happened?" She was quiet for a moment. The desert wind moved through the lane markers. A flag ticked and went still. "Family stuff," she said. It's not a short story." He didn't push, he just nodded, like he understood that some things were a long story and this was not the right time for it. "You mind if I ask you something technical sometimes?" he said. "I've noticed you already do," she said. He almost smiled. "Fair." The truth that Emily had never told anyone at Blackridge was this. Her grandfather, Robert Carter, had been one of the most decorated competitive long-range marksmen in the country. Not a military man, a pure civilian competitor who had won national championships across 3 different rifle disciplines between 1978 and 1997. He had built his own loads, maintained his own equipment, and understood the physics of external ballistics the way some people understand music, intuitively, in his bones, below the level of conscious calculation. He had started teaching Emily when she was 9 years old, not because she had asked, because he had watched her watching him one afternoon during a match and recognized something he knew. The way she tracked the flags, the way she went quiet when other people were reacting to noise, the way she asked questions about the wind rather than about the rifles, which most young people asked about first because rifles were interesting and wind was abstract. "You see it," he had told her. "Some people look at a range and see distances. You see the air." She had been shooting competitively by 14, placing at regional events. By 17, she was winning them. The plan, if there had been a plan, though it had been more of an understood trajectory, was that she would compete through college, qualify for national circuits, potentially pursue some form of professional or instructional path in the discipline. Then her mother had gotten sick. Not dramatically sick at first, gradually sick. The kind of sickness that rewrites a family's entire operating schedule over months and then years. Emily had come home from college to help, had deferred one semester and then another, and then simply stopped going back. Her grandfather had still been alive then, still offering to work around the situation, to keep her in the sport in whatever limited way they could manage. She had told him she needed to step away for a while. He had died 14 months later. After that, she had never picked up a rifle again. Not because of grief, exactly, though there had been grief. Because the shooting had been his. It had been something they had made together, and after he was gone, it felt like putting on someone else's clothes. The mechanics were familiar. The soul of it belonged to someone she couldn't get back. She had rebuilt her life by working. Environmental science degree, 3 years with a land assessment firm in Reno, a contract job doing site maintenance for a military installation in Arizona, which had led to Apex Range Services, which had led to Black Ridge. She had told herself she was fine with it. Mostly, she had been. But watching Cole's shooters work a problem she had already solved in her head, watching the spotters call corrections she had anticipated 30 seconds earlier, that did something to her. Something quiet and complicated that she didn't spend too much time examining because examining it too closely led to places she didn't want to go. January brought harder conditions to Black Ridge. The cold tightened everything. Air density increased, trajectories changed, equipment became less forgiving. Cole ran his shooters through night sessions with thermal optics, cold bore qualification drills, crosswind scenarios in the pre-dawn dark, when the mirage was gone and you had to read the environment from first principles. The training tempo accelerated as their deployment window drew closer. Emily adjusted her schedule accordingly. She started earlier to avoid being on the lanes during active training, which meant arriving before 0400 some mornings. On those mornings, the range was fully dark and completely still, and she moved through it all alone, running the brass from the prior day's late session, checking target frames by headlamp, filling out her maintenance log in the quiet. She didn't mind the solitude. She never had. One morning in late January, around 0430, she was working the far end of Lane 5, the longest lane, 1,700 meters, used exclusively for the extreme range sessions, when she found a rifle. Not abandoned, left there deliberately, secured in a padded case that had been slid under the equipment shelf at the shooter's position. She recognized it immediately by the case, a .303-8 Lapua Magnum precision rifle in a Macmillan chassis, the same model Cole used for his personal demonstrations. She had seen it on the platform a dozen times. The case had a yellow tag on the zipper that read, "Instructor, do not move." She didn't touch it. She finished her brass retrieval, logged the case as present on her maintenance form, and left. Cole found her note on the logboard at 0515 when the team arrived. "You logged the rifle case," he said, appearing at the top of the platform stairs. "Maintenance protocol," she said. "Unattended equipment gets noted. Most contractors just leave it." "I know." He looked at her for a moment from the top of the stairs. "You ever want to shoot again?" he said. "You come tell me." She didn't answer. He went back to his team. She went back to her brass. The morning of February the 9th started wrong before anyone could name what was wrong with it. Emily noticed it at 0410 during her first pass down the maintenance corridor. The air was different. Not the temperature, it was cold, same as every morning, 22 degrees with a northwest wind at around 12 knots. It was the quality of the quiet. Black Ridge was a busy installation even at that hour, with vehicle movement, generator noise, the background hum of an active military facility at low operational tempo. But that morning, the base was producing a kind of silence underneath its normal sounds that Emily had no rational name for. She had felt it before. Once, as a girl, the hour before a flash flood cut off the road behind her grandfather's property. The world had been making sound but somehow absorbing it differently, like something large was listening. She pushed the feeling aside and kept working. By 0445, she had finished the first 3 lanes and was moving to lane 4 when her phone buzzed. Not a call, a base notification. Weather update. High wind advisory for the surrounding ridgelines. Possible gusts to 40 knots by mid-morning. She noted it and kept moving. Cole's team arrived at 0500, same as always. There was a different energy in them that morning, though, tighter, more controlled. Their deployment was 2 weeks out. The training was in its final phase. Every session now was sharpening what was already sharp, and everyone knew it. Emily was working Section B of the maintenance corridor when Cole called the first shooter into position on lane 3. She kept her head down. The session began. It lasted 11 minutes. At 0511, the first mortar round hit the eastern berm. The explosion was large enough to lift sections of the berm wall and send them 40 feet into the air. The second round hit before the debris from the first had settled, this one closer, on the range floor proper, 40 meters south of lane 2. Emily was already moving toward the maintenance shelter when the third and fourth rounds hit in rapid succession, bracketing the range complex on 2 sides. The base sirens began at 0533. And the world that Emily Carter had been quietly maintaining for 2 years came apart at the seams. She was running when the shooting started. Not panic running, she kept low, moved between the lane dividers, used the berm section still standing as cover in the way she had learned once, long ago, in a different context from a man who had spent time in places where cover was the difference between living and not living. She made the maintenance shelter in 40 seconds. The door was heavy steel set into a reinforced concrete block, and the room beyond it was small, rated for 12 occupants, built for range emergency use. 7 civilian contractors were already inside when she pulled the door shut behind her. The sound outside became something else entirely. Not just mortars now, small arms, the distinctive ripping sound of automatic weapons, close enough that she could hear the difference between incoming and outgoing fire. And something else, the organized, controlled cadence of the SEAL team returning fire, recognizable even through concrete because of its precision, not automatic spray. Measured pairs, 1, 1, 1, 1, professional fire directed at specific targets. In the shelter, a contractor named Deshaun Harris, 41, hands shaking badly, was trying to calm a younger woman named Kayla, who had gone white and couldn't stop repeating that she needed to call her husband. "Hey," Emily said. "Kayla, look at me." Kayla looked at her. "He's not going to get good news from a phone call right now. We're in the safest place on this range. Concrete walls, steel door, no windows. Okay? Just breathe." I can't breathe." "Yes, you can. You're breathing right now. You're just doing it too fast. Slow it down. Follow me." She breathed slowly, deliberately, holding eye contact with Kayla, and after 20 seconds, the younger woman's chest stopped heaving and she started to match the rhythm. Deshaun was watching Emily with an expression she recognized, the look of someone recalculating who they're in a room with. Outside, the fire intensified. Then, at 0531, the shelter door banged open. Mason Cole came through it bleeding from a wound on his left forearm that had been field-wrapped with a tourniquet pulled tight above the elbow. His face was covered in dust and his voice was completely controlled. "I need Carter," he said. Every head in the shelter turned to look at Emily. She was already standing. "Talk to me," she said. "Mortar position, 730 meters, northeast ridgeline," he said, moving her to the side of the shelter, speaking low and fast. "They're ranging the command center right now. Third salvo will land on the building. My designated sniper took shrapnel in the first strike. He's out. Logan is spotting, but we don't have a shooter." "What do you have for me?" Cole unslung the rifle from his back. It was the .338 Lapua, his personal training rifle. He had pulled it from the case under the Lane 5 shelf. Emily looked at the rifle, then at Cole. 730 meters, she said. "Wind?" "Northwest, variable. Logan's calling about 12 knots with gusts. The gusts are the problem. They're cycling. Maybe every 40 seconds. 40 seconds. She thought of the Lane 4 flag, weeks ago, the berm gap, the cycling pattern. "Show me the position," she said. "Emily." He stopped. Something shifted in his face. Not doubt exactly, but honesty. "I have to ask you directly. You haven't fired a rifle in 12 years. You've never been under live fire. If I hand you this weapon, I need to know you can function." The shelter was absolutely silent. 7 contractors, frozen, watching the cleaning woman and the wounded SEAL instructor. Emily looked at the rifle in Cole's hands. She thought of her grandfather, the way he had stood behind her on a cold November morning when she was 9 years old, before she had ever fired a shot, before she had any right to the confidence he was extending to her. "You see it," he had told her. "Some people look at a range and see distances. You see the air." "I've never fired in combat," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "But I know I can hit." Cole held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he placed the rifle in her hands. The rifle was heavier than she remembered. Not physically. The Macmillan chassis ran just under 14 pounds unloaded, well within normal parameters for a .338 Lapua platform. But the weight of the thing in her hands was not just mechanical. It was every year she had not held one. It was her grandfather's voice and her mother's hospital room, and 12 years of a life built carefully around the shape of an absence. All of it compressed into 14 pounds of carbon fiber and cold steel. She didn't let herself feel any of that. She pushed it down the way she had learned to push things down. Efficiently, without drama, the way you seal a room you're not ready to enter yet. There would be time for it later. Or there wouldn't. Either way, this was not the moment. "Give me the data," she said. Cole was already moving toward the shelter's secondary access point, a low steel hatch at the rear of the room that opened onto a maintenance crawlway running beneath the elevated platform. He had clearly scouted this before coming to find her. He knew exactly where he was taking her. "Logan set up on the platform deck behind the equipment lockers," he said, moving low and fast through the crawlway, Emily right behind him with the rifle cradled across her forearms. He's got a clear sight line to the northeast ridgeline, but he can't hold the spotter scope and shoot at the same time, and I'm down one hand. He gestured briefly with his wounded arm. The tourniquet was holding, but his left hand had the gray-white color of significantly reduced circulation. The mortar position is dug into a natural depression about 60 meters below the ridgeline crest. 2 to 3 personnel. They fired 4 salvos. Fifth will come in approximately 4 minutes based on their reload pattern. How are you reading their reload pattern? Logan's been timing them. What's his latest interval? 3 minutes 40 at the short end, 4 minutes 10 at the long end. Emily was doing the arithmetic while she moved. 4 minutes was not a lot of time, but it was enough if she was already in position when the cycle completed. What's my firing position? Platform deck, lane 3. Logan's already ranged and logged it. 731 meters to the position center. He has a firing solution built, but it's a starting point only. Conditions are variable. I know, she said. I watched that ridgeline this morning. Cole glanced back at her as they moved through the crawlway. She saw him register that. Not surprise, he was past surprise with her. More like confirmation of something he had already decided to believe. They came up through the platform access hatch into a world that was nothing like the range she had worked every morning for 2 years. The elevated platform deck, the long, covered structure where the SEAL team ran their training sessions, was now a fighting position. 2 of Cole's operators were positioned at the platform's northern end, engaging targets on the near slope of the eastern ridgeline with suppressed rifles, their fire controlled and economical, buying time against whatever secondary assault was pressing from that direction. Another operator, a compact woman Emily had heard called Vasquez, was on the radio with what sounded like a quick reaction force somewhere off base, her voice flat and professional and very fast. The world beyond the platform was smoke and dust and the flat crack of outgoing fire mixing with the deeper, less organized sound of the enemy assault. Emily didn't let herself look at any of it except what she needed. She tracked the northeast ridgeline, 700 meters and change of open desert, and found what she was looking for in the terrain. The natural depression Cole had described was visible even without optics if you knew what you were looking for. A shadow in the rock that was slightly too regular. A discoloration at the lip of the depression from disturbed earth. She had looked at that ridgeline from the maintenance corridor every single morning for 2 years, and she knew its natural profile the way she knew the lines in her own hands. The disturbance was approximately 8 meters left of the scrub brush cluster at the 600-meter visual marker she had always used to estimate range on the long lanes. She settled in behind the equipment lockers. Logan Pierce was already there. She had seen Logan Pierce on the platform 100 times. He was 34, compact and dark-haired, with a spotter's habitual stillness. The kind of man who could hold a position without fidgeting for longer than most people could sit in a comfortable chair. He had always been professional and entirely indifferent to her existence, the way most of the operators were. She was maintenance. He was special operations. The categories did not intersect. He looked at her now with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite succeeding. Cole says you can shoot, he said. Cole didn't say that, Emily said, getting behind the rifle, settling her position against the equipment locker, finding her natural point of aim. He said he was out of options. Those aren't the same thing. No, she agreed. They're not. Logan watched her for 2 seconds. She could feel the assessment happening, the rapid, involuntary calculation of a professional trying to evaluate an unknown quantity against a ticking clock. She understood it. She would have done the same. Then he put his eye back to the spotting scope. Current conditions, he said, shifting into spotter mode with a professionalism she respected. Wind northwest, variable. Reading 9 to 14 knots at firing position, estimating similar at target. Last gust cycle completed approximately 35 seconds ago. You're going to get a lull in the next 5 to 10 seconds, then it builds back. Density altitude approximately 4,200 feet, temperature 21 degrees Fahrenheit. I have a firing solution built for 731 meters, 9-knot average wind, right to left. Elevation correction dialed to your dope card. Whose dope card? A brief pause. Cole's. This is Cole's rifle. Emily took a breath. Cole's dope card would be built around Cole's specific cheek weld, eye relief, and trigger technique. It was a starting point, not a guarantee. She would need to account for the difference. What's the target presentation? She said. Depression is approximately 4 meters wide at the lip, 2 to 3 meters deep. I have visual on one confirmed operator at the tube, the mortar operator. Second individual is intermittently visible at the left edge, likely the loader. Possible third at the rear, but I cannot confirm. Targeting priority? Tube operator first. Take out the man running the mortar, the system goes silent. Secondary is the loader. Copy. She settled in. The rifle came into her shoulder the way familiar things come back. Not easily, not smoothly, but recognizably. Like returning to a house you grew up in after years away. The rooms are the same shape even when the furniture has changed. Her cheek found the stock. Her eye found the glass. The reticle came up, and the world through the scope was very clear. $400 glass versus what she'd grown up with. Good glass, she noted automatically. Clean, minimal distortion at the edges. The kind of optic that didn't make excuses for the shooter. She found the depression. The mortar tube was there. She could see the bipod legs, the base plate. The operator was crouched behind the tube, going through a reload motion, extracting a spent cartridge, positioning the next round. He was wearing desert camouflage that was good, but not perfect. And he was partially backlit by the lighter rock of the ridgeline behind him, which gave her a slightly better edge definition than she would have had otherwise. The wind flag at the far end of Lane 3, still standing, somehow, at the edge of the range, was doing what Cole had described, cycling. Building to 14-15 knots, then dropping to near flat, then building again. She timed it, 38 seconds, 39. The flag dropped. The lull. Wind's down, Logan said. I see it. She had 9 knots maximum on the residual, decreasing. She was working with Cole's elevation setting and compensating for her own eye relief with a very slight position adjustment. The reticle settled. Her finger moved to the trigger she had never pulled on this rifle, in this configuration, at this distance, under these conditions. Her grandfather's voice, not remembered consciously, but present the way temperature is present. The shot is always the same shot. Distance is just a number. Wind is just math. The only thing that changes the outcome is whether you're here, inside this moment, or somewhere else. She was here. One breath in, half out. The reticle stopped moving. She pressed the trigger. The .338 Lapua hit her shoulder with the authority that cartridge always brought. Not painful, not shocking, but substantial, a force that could not be ignored. The muzzle rose with the recoil, and she brought it back down and watched through the scope as she reacquired the target. 2 seconds of flight time at that distance. Logan was very still. Then, hit, operator down. Emily was already working the bolt, the casing ejected. She chambered the next round. The depression was movement and confusion now, the loader scrambling, looking for the threat, not certain of the direction. She found him against the left edge of the depression. I was moving erratically, which was the smart response and the problem. The wind was building again. Wind coming up, Logan said. 11 knots. She didn't wait for 12. The second shot broke during the build-out phase. The compensation was instinctual, which was wrong. She knew better than to trust instinct on a rifle she didn't have dope for. But the instinct that took over was not a guess. It was 2 decades of accumulated observation firing before her conscious calculation could interfere. The loader went down. Logan exhaled. 2 for 2, he said. There was something in his voice she couldn't fully categorize. Mortar position is silent. Emily kept the rifle up. She was watching the depression. The tube was still there, the base plate. No movement at the position now, but I have a possible third, she said. I don't see movement. At the rear of the depression, there's a shape against the back wall that wasn't there before. Logan adjusted his scope. Silence. 4 seconds. 5. You're right, he said quietly. He's pressed flat. He's not moving. Waiting for us to declare clear and shift attention. Yeah. She kept the reticle on the shape. Not firing, the shape had not presented a weapons threat, and she was not going to send a round into something she wasn't certain of. But she watched it. And she waited. And after 90 seconds, the shape moved, rolled left, and the muzzle of a weapon cleared the lip of the depression. She took the shot before Logan called it. The shape stopped moving. Clear, Logan said. Emily came off the scope. Her hands were steady. She noticed this the way she noticed everything, as data. Her heart rate was elevated but controlled. She had a slight tremor in her left knee that was adrenaline, not fear, and she recognized it for what it was. She had not been afraid during the shots. She had been present. There was a difference. Cole appeared at her left elbow. "Mortar position is down," he said into his radio. "Command center is not—" A burst of static. He listened. His face changed. "Copy that. How many?" He clicked off. "RPG team," he said. "Moving on the main gate. 3 individuals, tube, and 2 security elements. They're 60 meters from the gate." "Distance from us?" "Gate is approximately 410 meters from this position." "Moving targets?" "Approaching on foot from the service road. Current speed? Logan?" Logan was already back on the scope, traversing north. "I have them," he said. 3 individuals. 1 carrying the tube. It's a PG-7 launcher. It's up on his shoulder. The other 2 are flanking, armed with AKs. They're jogging, 40 meters from the gate. Emily had already shifted position. She was reorienting north, adjusting for the new angle, working the math without speaking it aloud. 410 meters was a simpler shot than 731. The difficulty was the movement and the angle. She was shooting from elevated to near level, which changed the effective gravity component slightly, and the targets were perpendicular to her position, crossing her field of fire rather than presenting face-on. "Wind?" she said. "Same. Northwest 9 knots. Your elevation advantage is minimal at this range, maybe 2 degrees. She found the RPG operator in the scope. He was jogging with the launcher at his shoulder, which meant he was ready to fire the moment he had a clean angle on the gate. The gate was not hardened against RPG fire. 1 round into the gate structure and the entry control point, and the 2 guards she could see flattened behind the guard shack, was gone. 30 meters, Logan said. She was already there. The lead calculation on a jogging target at 400 meters was not a complex problem. Speed approximately 5 miles per hour, crossing angle maybe 70 degrees. She worked ahead of the reticle, put the hold where the man would be when the round arrived. The trigger broke. The RPG operator went down at 22 meters from the gate. She was already cycling the bolt. The launcher hit the ground. The second individual, the right flanker, broke into a sprint for the gate. She tracked him, led him, and the second shot stopped him at 15 meters. The third individual turned and ran. She watched him through the scope, running away from the gate, back toward the service road. He was not a threat at this moment. He was not presenting a weapon. He was running. She held. She did not fire. Logan looked at her. "He's clear of the gate," she said. "He'll regroup." "He's not a target right now." Logan said nothing for a moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay." Cole behind them transmitted the gate situation on his radio. Someone else would handle the fleeing individual. That was not her decision, and she had made the right one. What surprised her was that she had been able to make it. That in the middle of all this noise and smoke and the chemical taste of adrenaline at the back of her throat, she had been able to draw a line between the man who was a threat and the man who was running and hold that line. She had been afraid she wouldn't be able to. She had been afraid she would fire because it was simpler to fire, and the simplicity would feel like clarity. It didn't. It felt like noise. Holding the shot had felt like the only clear thing. The next 12 minutes were managed chaos. Cole's 2 operators on the north end of the platform had suppressed the secondary assault from the eastern slope. 3 enemy fighters, she learned later, attempting to exploit the mortar attack by breaching the perimeter wire on the northeast corner while the base's attention was directed to the main gate. They had been stopped cold. 1 operator, a big Texan the others called Rook, had taken a grazing wound to the shoulder but had kept shooting anyway. She had heard him matter-of-factly report the wound on the radio in between firing, the way a person might mention they'd spilled coffee. Vasquez had coordinated the QRF Vector, 2 armored vehicles that were now approaching from the western access road, their arrival complicating the enemy's tactical picture enough that the assault's momentum had broken in the 12 minutes since Emily had silenced the mortar position. But the base was not clear. Cole knew it. She could tell from the way he was listening to the radio, not the message itself, which she couldn't hear clearly, but the rhythm of his listening. The slight stillness of a man receiving information that doesn't complete a picture. "A picture. Logan," he said. "Scan east, full sector." Logan traversed the spotting scope slowly from the northeast ridgeline all the way to the southeastern edge of the range complex. Emily kept the rifle up, tracking loosely, watching for what Cole was looking for without knowing what it was. The radio crackled. A voice came through that was tight but controlled. Sniper activity. Single shooter. Location unknown. Bravo 2 is down. Unknown casualty status. Cole's jaw set. They have an overwatch element, he said, quietly. To himself as much as to them. Enemy sniper? Logan said. They've had one this whole time. He's been observing. Cole looked at the ridgeline, at the surrounding terrain, the way he looked at a problem he was in the process of solving. The assault was a package. Mortar to suppress defensive fire, RPG to breach the gate, rifle element to exploit the breach. The sniper is the overwatch. He coordinates, he protects the assault elements, and if the assault fails, he picks off whoever stopped it, Logan finished. They were both quiet for 1 second. Then Logan slowly turned his scope toward a different part of the ridgeline. Not the northeast where the mortar had been, further east. A longer angle. A position Emily hadn't thought to look at because it offered a less direct line to the range complex, which, she realized immediately, was precisely why it was a good position. It was not the obvious choice. It was the choice a serious shooter made. What's out there, she said. Southern spur, Logan said. 750, maybe 800 meters. There's a rock formation, natural hide site. I've thought about it as a potential training scenario position. He was looking at it now. She couldn't read his expression fully because he was behind the scope, but she could read his shoulders, the slight forward lean, the held breath. Logan, Cole said. I might have something, Logan said. East face of the spur. There's a shape. It's very good. It's tucked in tight. But the color is wrong for natural rock. Emily was already adjusting the rifle, swinging east. Bearing, she said. South-southeast from lane 3 firing position. I'm estimating 820 meters. 820 meters. She found the southern spur in the scope. The rock formation Logan had described resolved into focus. A jumble of large boulders in rough strata, the kind of natural feature that appeared randomly and often throughout the Nevada high desert. She scanned it slowly. Let the scope do the work. Did not rush. There. At the eastern face. A slight irregularity in the shadow pattern. A shape that was close to right but not quite right. Geometry that was slightly too intentional for natural rock. A good hide. Someone who knew what they were doing. I see it, she said. Can you confirm a weapon? Cole said. She was already looking for it. The shape was good. Whoever had built this position had taken time. They had arranged the natural cover well, but the weapon had to have some exposure at the muzzle, or the shooter could not shoot. She was looking for that exposure. The gap in the rock where the objective lens of their scope might catch light, where the muzzle brake might disturb the outline. She found it, a very small disturbance at the left edge of the primary rock, a shadow that was too thin and too straight, a rifle barrel. It was pointing west, toward the platform, toward her. She stopped breathing. In 12 years of not shooting, she had never once stood on the wrong end of a scope. She had been in dangerous situations since, who hadn't, living long enough. But she had never felt what she was feeling at this exact moment, which was the specific, cold, cellular knowledge that somewhere in those rocks, 820 meters away, there was a human being looking back at her through glass of their own. A human being who had been watching this platform for the last 15 minutes, who had watched her shoot the mortar crew, who had watched her shoot the RPG team, and who was now completing his own calculations. Cole, she said. Her voice was even. She was proud of that. That barrel is oriented to this platform. Cole moved without any wasted motion. He was suddenly at her left. Logan, all personnel off the platform deck now, he said. Move, move. Logan started to pull back from the scope. Emily did not move, because she understood, in the same way she had understood the wind on lane 4, in the same instinctive observational way that had taken her entire life to develop, that if she lifted her head from this rifle right now, the man in those rocks was going to fire. Not at the people pulling back, at the platform itself, at the equipment, at whatever he could see moving, and then he was going to reposition, and they were never going to find him again. Cole, she said, Carter, move. If I come off this rifle right now, he repositions. We lose him. A beat. She heard Cole stop moving. Then what are you saying? He said. She kept her eye to the scope. She kept the reticle on the shape in the rocks. the shape that was almost certainly doing exactly what she was doing right now, watching her through glass, reading her, calculating whether she was a threat or whether the platform was clearing out. "I'm saying," she said quietly, "that we have the same problem." She felt Cole come back to her left side, very still, very close. 820, he said. "That's my read. Variable wind. I know. At that distance, at this wind, with a rifle you've had in your hands for 20 minutes. I know," she said again. She could feel him thinking, working the odds the way a man with his experience worked odds. Not emotionally, but not without weight either. She was not his sniper. She was not his operator. She was a civilian contractor who had done two things well in the last 15 minutes, and was now proposing to attempt a third that was significantly harder. He was quiet for 4 full seconds. Then, "Logan, stay on the scope." Logan, who had halted his movement off the platform, came back to the spotting scope without a word. Cole got down low and close, behind Emily's right shoulder. She could hear him breathing, controlled, paced, the respiration of a man managing himself. "Talk me through your read," he said. "Shape at the east face of the spur. Rifle barrel visible at the left edge. It's an extremely narrow exposure, maybe 4 inches of barrel extending past the primary rock. The height is good. They've layered natural material. The scope is recessed. I can't see the glass, but the geometry of the barrel orientation puts the scope roughly 18 to 20 inches behind the muzzle. Shooter presentation? Nothing. The body is fully concealed. I'm shooting at a barrel. A 4-inch barrel exposure at 800 meters. Approximately. Emily." He said her name. Not Carter. Emily. She noticed. "A 4-inch target at 820, variable wind, unknown dope adjustment on a rifle you're not zeroed to. That is not a high probability shot." "No," she said. "It's not." "Then why are you still on the rifle?" She didn't answer for a moment. The reticle was very steady. Her heartbeat was slow. The wind was in a lull. She could feel it in the way the ambient sound of the desert had dropped a half note, the way the dust on the range floor had settled. The lull would last approximately 38 seconds. She had used about 9 of them already. "Because it's the only shot available," she said. "And I'm the only one positioned to take it." Cole said nothing. "And because," she said, quieter now, almost to herself, "he's going to fire in the next 20 seconds if I don't." She didn't know how she knew that. It was not calculation. It was the same thing it had always been. The reading of something invisible that became visible when you paid attention long enough and in the right way. The shape in the rocks had been still for 90 seconds. That was too long for an observer. That was the stillness of a shooter who had completed his preparation and was now in his final hold. He was about to fire. "Logan," she said, "confirmation on wind. Current lull, residual 3 to 4 knots right to left. Wind picking up in..." He paused, watching his instrument. 15 seconds, estimated. 15 seconds. She settled the reticle. Not on the barrel. 4 inches left of the barrel, accounting for Cole's 0 versus her eye relief adjustment. The bullet would drift 1.3 minutes of angle in a residual 4-knot crosswind at 820 meters. The 4-inch barrel was approximately 1/3 of a minute of angle wide at that distance. If she was off by half a minute of angle in any direction, she missed clean. She did not think about missing. She did not think about anything. She was 9 years old. She was 23 years old. She was standing in the rain at a match in Colorado, while her grandfather's voice told her the same thing it had told her 100 times in 100 different registers. Be here. Just be here. The trigger had approximately 2 pounds of brake weight. She took up the slack, felt the wall, held. 3 seconds. 2. The reticle was a single still point in the center of everything. 1. She pressed through the wall. The rifle fired. The recoil lifted her, and she rode it back down, and the scope came back onto the target, and she watched the rocks at the eastern face of the southern spur for the 2 seconds of flight time that felt like nothing and like forever simultaneously. A shape moved at the hide site. Not the intentional movement of a shooter completing his own trigger press. The involuntary, immediate, total movement of a body losing its structural integrity. The rifle barrel at the edge of the rock tilted upward, slowly, the way things fall when they are no longer being held, and then dropped from sight. Logan's voice was very quiet. "Target down," he said. Nobody said anything for 3 full seconds. Then, from somewhere on the north end of the platform, Rook's voice, the big Texan with the shoulder wound who had apparently never stopped paying attention to everything around him even while bleeding, said one word. Damn. Cole was still behind Emily's right shoulder. She could feel him there. She came off the scope slowly. Her hands were shaking now, the first time they had shaken since she had taken the rifle from Cole in the shelter. And she noted this with something that was not quite surprise and not quite relief. The shaking was aftermath. The body reporting back from an experience the conscious mind had held at arm's length for the duration. She looked at her hands for 1 second. Then she set them flat on the platform deck and waited for them to steady. Cole watched her do this. He did not say anything about it. When her hands had steadied, she stood up and turned around. Every operator on the platform was looking at her. Vasquez, still holding the radio handset. The 2 shooters from the north end. Rook, with a pressure bandage on his shoulder and an expression she couldn't name. Logan Pierce, who had come off his scope and was looking at her with something that was a long way from the professional indifference he had offered her 2 hours ago. Cole stood to her right. She handed him the rifle. He took it. He looked at her with an expression that was careful and serious and said nothing for long enough that she wasn't sure he was going to say anything at all. How long? He said finally. She knew what he was asking. Since I was 9, she said. Something moved across his face. Complex, not reducible to a single thing. Outside, the QRF vehicles were pulling through the main gate. Attack helicopters. She could hear the distinctive sound of their rotors before she saw them, were approaching from the southwest, and whoever was on the radio with Vasquez was now directing them to the remaining enemy positions. The assault was over. The base was not silent. It would not be silent for hours, with the helicopters and the vehicles and the organized chaos of a post-attack accountability and casualty collection. But the specific, horrible quality of noise that had characterized the last 40 minutes was gone. What replaced it, for Emily Carter, was not relief exactly. It was something stranger. It was the feeling of a door she had bolted from the inside 12 years ago, standing open behind her. She hadn't opened it. She didn't know what to do about that yet. She picked up her brass bucket from where she had left it at the base of the platform stairs 3 years and 40 minutes ago, and she stood there holding it while the base reorganized itself around her and nobody, for one brief strange moment, continue, said a word in her direction. That wouldn't last. She already knew it wouldn't last. 3 hours from now, men with rank and authority and clipboards were going to want to know exactly what had happened on this platform. They were going to ask questions she would have to answer honestly, and the honest answers were going to open doors. She had not chosen to open, and there was nothing she could do about any of it. But for right now, in this particular moment, she was standing on a range she had swept every morning for 2 years, holding a brass bucket, and on the far ridgeline the dust was settling over positions that would never fire again. She looked at the dust. She thought about her grandfather. Not sentimentally, not with the complicated grief she usually carried when she thought about him, just directly. The way you look at something you haven't let yourself see clearly in a very long time. He would have had something to say about this morning. He always had something to say. She couldn't hear it yet, over all the noise. But she thought that maybe, when the noise finally settled, she would be able to. The helicopters came in low and fast from the southwest. 2 AH-64s running a gun pass on the remaining enemy positions along the eastern approach, and the sound of their 30mm cannons was so large and so close that Emily felt it in her back teeth. She stood on the range floor with the brass bucket in her hand and watched the dust rise off the ridgeline in long brown curtains. The QRF vehicles, 2 MRAPs rolling hard through the main gate, had already disgorged their personnel and were pushing east toward the wire breach on the northeast corner. She could hear the radio traffic from Vasquez's position on the platform above her, the clipped coordination of people managing the post-attack phase, accountability reports, and casualty locations, and sector-by-sector clearance requests coming in over each other in the organized pileup that always followed the end of violence. She knew that rhythm. She had heard it before, from a different position, a different life. She put the bucket down. Her hands were steady again. The shaking had lasted about 90 seconds and then stopped, which was faster than she would have predicted, and she didn't know whether to be reassured by that or unsettled. She decided it didn't matter. There were things to do. The first thing was to go back to the maintenance shelter and check on the 7 contractors she had left in there. She walked the corridor. The range had taken significant damage. Lane 2's target frames were gone entirely, blown inward by the second mortar round, and the elevated platform over Lane 3 had a section of its roof blown out by a near miss that had scattered concrete across 20 meters of range floor. The brass she had collected that morning was still in the bucket she'd left near Lane 4's section marker, undisturbed, which struck her as faintly absurd. The world had come apart, and the brass was still in the bucket. She pushed the shelter door open. 7 faces turned to her. Deshaun Harris. Kayla, who had been breathing too fast 2 hours ago and was now simply pale and very still. 5 others she knew by sight, but not name. An equipment tech, 2 target maintenance contractors, a generator specialist named Phil, who was about 60 and had been in this line of work for 30 years and was currently sitting against the back wall with his arms on his knees, looking like a man reviewing every decision he had ever made. Nobody said anything for a moment. "It's over," Emily said. "The base is clearing. Stay here until someone with authority tells you to move." "Is anyone dead?" Kayla asked. Her voice was flat. Not panicked anymore, just flat. "I don't know yet." "Were you up there?" Deshaun said. "On the range?" She looked at him. "Yes," she said. He looked at her steadily. There was a question in his face that he was choosing not to ask out loud, and she was grateful for that. "You should eat something," he said instead. "There's protein bars in the emergency kit on the wall." She almost laughed. "I'm okay," she said. "Just stay put." The formal accountability process began at 0820. A base operations officer, Major Gerald Finch, 46, a logistics man who had never seen a firefight in his life, but ran post-incident protocol with the structured efficiency of someone who had trained for exactly this and was grateful to have a procedure to follow. Moved through the installation with a clipboard and 2 enlisted assistants taking head counts and recording locations. Emily gave her name, contractor ID, and location during the attack. The assistant wrote it down without any particular reaction. Then, at 0917, a different set of people came looking for her. There were 3 of them. A woman in her 40s wearing civilian clothes that were slightly too well cut for a base contractor and carrying a tablet rather than a clipboard. A man in Army uniform with a rank Emily identified as Lieutenant Colonel, someone she had never seen at Black Ridge before. And walking slightly behind them, Mason Cole. Cole's arm had been properly dressed. His forearm was in a clean bandage now, the field tourniquet replaced with proper wound care. He was moving without any apparent accommodation for the injury, which told her it was painful and that he was choosing not to show that. They found Emily at the maintenance shed, where she had begun the process of documenting range damage for her contractor report because she needed something to do with her hands, and this was the thing she knew how to do. "Ms. Carter," the woman said, "I'm Helen Park, NCIS Special Agent. This is Lieutenant Colonel Warren. We'd like to speak with you." "Okay," Emily said. They didn't ask if she was okay. They didn't express sympathy for what she had been through. Helen Park was the kind of person who had a job to do and did it, and Emily respected that more than she would have respected concern. They set up in the range office, a small room attached to the south end of the covered platform, used for briefings and equipment sign-out. Cole came in with them and sat against the wall. He was not, Emily noted, part of the official interview process. He was there as something else, a witness or a context provider, or simply because he had chosen to be there and nobody had told him to leave. Helen Park set her tablet on the table and looked at Emily with the measured attention of someone who processed people for a living. "Tell me what happened from the moment you first heard the mortars," she said. Emily told her. Precisely and in order, without editorializing. Times, positions, decisions, shot data. Helen Park listened without interrupting, typing as Emily spoke. The lieutenant colonel wrote in a notebook. Cole sat against the wall and was very still. When Emily finished, Helen Park looked at her for a moment. "You identified the enemy overwatch position before the base's own intelligence assets flagged it," Park said. "Yes." "How?" "Color differential in the shadow pattern. The natural rock formation reads at a certain color temperature in that light. The hide material they'd used was close but not exact. You observed that at 820 meters. I was using a scope. An unfamiliar scope on an unfamiliar rifle." "Yes." Park made a note. She did not look particularly surprised by any of this, which meant she had already spoken to Logan Pierce and possibly Cole before coming to find Emily. She was confirming, not discovering. Prior to this morning, Park said, had you fired a precision rifle in any operational context? No, I was a competitive shooter. That's a different thing. When did you last fire competitively? 12 years ago. The lieutenant colonel looked up from his notebook. It was the first time he had reacted visibly to anything Emily had said. 12 years, he said. Yes, sir. He looked at Cole. Cole looked at the table. Park continued. The confirmed engagements attributed to your position this morning, the northeast ridgeline mortar position, the RPG element at the main gate, and the overwatch position at the southern spur. Do you agree with those attributions? The mortar position? Yes. The RPG element? Yes. Though I did not engage the third individual who fled the scene, he was no longer presenting a threat at the time. She paused. The overwatch position? Yes. Why did you decline the third RPG individual? Because he was running away from a populated area with his weapon down and no longer posed an immediate danger. Engaging a non-threatening individual is not something I was willing to do. Park wrote that down. Carefully, Emily noticed. That's a judgment that trained operators with significant experience sometimes struggle to make clearly under fire, Park said. Her voice was completely neutral. It could have been a compliment or an observation. I'm aware, Emily said. Cole, against the wall, exhaled through his nose. It was not quite a sound, but Emily heard it. The interview lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. At the end of it, Helen Park closed her tablet and looked at Emily in a way that was different from the way she had looked at her during the interview, more direct, less procedural. I want to be straightforward with you, Park said. What happened on this range this morning is going to receive significant attention from multiple agencies. There will be follow-up interviews. You will likely be asked to undergo a formal psychological evaluation, standard for civilians involved in lethal force incidents. Your contractor status may be affected during the review period. I understand, Emily said. You should also understand that the preliminary assessment of your actions is, Park paused, chose her word carefully, remarkable. Emily said nothing. I'm not saying that to make you feel good, Park continued. I'm saying it because you need to know what's coming. People are going to want to understand how this happened. They're going to have questions about you and your background and your capabilities that go beyond what you've shared today. You should be prepared for that. I've been an open book this morning, Emily said. I know, that's noted. Park stood, collected her tablet. Lieutenant Colonel Warren. Warren stood. He was looking at Emily with an expression that was somewhere between professional assessment and something more personal, something she associated with the way people looked at things. They were trying to fit into a category that didn't exist yet. He left without speaking to her directly. Park followed him. Cole stayed. He remained against the wall for a moment after the others left. Then he pulled a chair from against the wall and sat down across the table from her, not in the position Park had used, formal, structured, but turned slightly sideways, elbows on his knees, which was the posture of a man who was done with formal. How are you? He said. I don't know yet, she said. I'll figure it out later. He nodded. He understood that answer. She could tell. I need to ask you something, he said. Okay. The overwatch shot. He stopped, looked at the table, then back at her. 820 meters, 4-inch target exposure, variable wind, 15 minutes of trigger time on a rifle you'd never shot before. That is... He stopped again. He seemed to be editing something. That is an extremely difficult shot. For anyone. I know. I need to understand your read on it. Not for the investigation. For me. She looked at him. The wind was in a lull, she said. I had maybe 15 seconds of residual 4-knot cross. The target was stationary. The exposure was small, but it was consistent. He wasn't moving the barrel, he was in his final hold. That actually helped. A moving target is harder than a small target. That's not what I'm asking, Cole said. She waited. I'm asking how you knew he was about to fire. Emily was quiet for a moment. I don't have a precise answer for that, she said finally. Try. She thought about it, really thought about it, not just reaching for the first articulation that came to hand. The position had been still for too long, she said. An observer moves. They adjust. They track. A shooter in final hold goes completely still because any movement disrupts the shot. The shape in that hide had been completely still for 90 seconds. She paused. And the barrel orientation had shifted. very slightly. By the time I was looking at it, he had already moved his muzzle from a scanning position to a directed position. He was aimed. He had a target. He was in his trigger. Cole absorbed that. You saw a barrel orientation shift at 800 meters, he said, 4 to 5 degrees. The shadow at the rock edge changed shape. He was quiet for a long time. Okay, he said. Okay? Yeah. He stood up, picked up his chair, and put it back against the wall. Then he turned back to her. For what it's worth, Carter, what you did this morning is not... He stopped, shook his head. Not in negation, in something else. I've been running precision shooting training for 6 years. I know what this community looks like at its best. What you did this morning is not normal. I know, she said. You need to know it too. She looked at him. I know what I can do, she said. I've always known. I just stopped doing it. Why? She had answered a version of this question 3 times today. She gave him the honest version, the one she hadn't given Park or Warren. Because it was his, she said. After he was gone, picking it back up felt like... She stopped, started again. Like wearing a dead person's clothes. It fit, but it wasn't mine. Cole was quiet. Is it yours now? He said. She thought about the moment the third shot had broken, the way the reticle had been a single still point, the way she had been nowhere else, not in her grandfather's memory, not in a competitive context, not in the complicated grief of everything that had happened between then and now. Just here. Present. Herself. I think it might be, she said. Cole nodded once. Good, he said, and left. The base entered what the military called Consolidated Operations Tempo, the organized, grinding work of accounting for everything after a significant incident. Casualty reports, equipment inventories, perimeter reestablishment, intel processing of the captured enemy equipment, and the identities of the dead. Emily learned, through Vasquez, who came to find her in the late morning, with the frank information-sharing manner of someone who had decided Emily had earned the right to know things, that the total confirmed enemy force had been 11 personnel. 3 at the mortar position, 3 in the RPG team, 3 in the wire breach assault element, the Overwatch shooter, and 1 more, the 11th man, who had been found dead on the eastern slope, apparently from wounds sustained in the initial exchange with Cole's operators. Of the 11, 6 were confirmed as foreign nationals with documented ties to a militant network that had been on Black Ridge's intelligence radar for approximately 8 months. The remaining 5 were still being processed. The base had taken casualties. 2 personnel from the gate guard post had been wounded by shrapnel in the initial mortar barrage. 1, seriously, evacuated to a trauma facility in Las Vegas, 1 treated on site. Cole's designated sniper, Staff Sergeant Mark Ryu, had taken shrapnel through his right side in the same first barrage and was in surgery at the same Las Vegas facility. His prognosis was good, but the injury would end his deployment cycle. Rook's shoulder wound was a through and through from a round that had crossed the platform during the wire breach assault. He had been treated and was back on duty within 4 hours, which impressed Emily and apparently surprised no one who knew him. Nobody else on the SEAL element had taken a hit. Emily was given a space in the base's administrative building to sit and wait while various processes worked themselves out around her. She was given water, food she mostly didn't eat, and the occasional check-in from a base support officer who was clearly not sure what category to put her in. She was in that room at 13:40 when Logan Pierce knocked on the open door. She looked up. He was still in his operational gear minus the outer plate carrier, which he'd removed at some point in the last few hours. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee in paper cups from the break room down the hall. He set one on the table in front of her without asking whether she wanted it. Then he sat down across from her. She waited. I owe you something, he said. You don't. I was skeptical. I know. I shouldn't have let it show. You were professional, she said. Given the circumstances, professional was enough. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had prepared more of an apology than she was accepting and was slightly thrown off by that. You don't want me to say it, he said. I want you to drink your coffee, she said. He drank his coffee. After a moment, she said, What was your read on the Overwatch shot? Honestly. Logan put his cup down. Honestly? He looked at the table. When you called the target, I was looking at the same position and I had... Maybe 40% confidence there was something there. It was really clean. The hide was good. It was good, she agreed. When you told Cole you were taking the shot, He stopped. I didn't say anything. I should have said something. What would you have said? I don't know. Something like, that's not a high percentage shot. He looked at her. Which Cole already said. He did. And you took it anyway? Yes. Why? She had answered this too, multiple times today in various forms. But Logan was asking it differently than the others had. He wasn't asking as an investigator or an authority figure. He was asking as a fellow professional trying to understand a technical decision. Because the alternative was doing nothing, she said. And doing nothing wasn't actually an option. It just looked like one. Logan absorbed that. Remaining elements from that assault could have re-engaged. The Overwatch position had the high ground and cover. If he repositioned after we cleared the platform, we'd have had an active hostile with a precision rifle watching every movement on this base until QRF could find and clear him, and that could have been hours. She picked up her coffee. The shot was low percentage. Doing nothing was lower. You did the math on that in real time, Logan said. I was raised to do the math on everything. He nodded slowly. Then, you were competitive how long before you stopped? From 9 to 20. Regional? And national. What level? She looked at him. I was ranked 6th in the country at 20, she said. Open division. Logan Pierce, who had 12 years in special operations and had sat behind the spotting scope for some of the best precision shooters in the American military, was quiet for a moment. 6th, he said. Yes. At 20 years old. I was still improving. He put his coffee down, looked at the ceiling briefly, then back at her. Okay, he said. I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm going to stop talking about this morning. Go ahead. What you did out there, the mortar position, the gate, the overwatch, that is the highest level precision shooting I have ever personally observed. Not almost. Not close. The highest. He held her gaze. And I've been in this work for 12 years. Emily looked at him. She didn't know what to do with that statement. It was too large. It sat in the room between them and took up too much space, and she didn't have a container for it yet. She filed it. She would come back to it later, when she had more room. Thank you, she said. Yeah. He stood, picked up his cup. For what it's worth about being skeptical earlier, Logan, she said. He stopped. Drink your coffee, she said. He almost smiled. It was a minimal thing, a small shift at the corner of his mouth. But she caught it. He left. What? At 17:45, the day's light beginning to go flat and orange. Over the western ridge, Helen Park came back. She was alone this time. She sat across from Emily in the same chair Logan had used, and she opened her tablet and then didn't look at it. I've been in contact with some people, Park said. There are some things I want to tell you, and I want to be clear that this is informal. Nothing I'm about to say constitutes an offer, a commitment, or any kind of official process. Understood, Emily said. The individuals who command the precision shooting training programs at 2 different installations have been briefed on today's incident. Not in detail. The full investigation is ongoing and restricted, but in sufficient detail for them to have formed preliminary views. Emily waited. The consensus view, Park said, is that what you demonstrated today represents a capacity that is effectively unrecruitable through standard pathways. You cannot train someone to do what you did. You can refine it, direct it, develop it, but the underlying capacity is either there or it isn't, and it develops through a specific kind of formation that takes years and is essentially irreproducible in an adult. My grandfather, Emily said. Yes, I read the competitive record this afternoon. Robert Carter, 3 national titles, 14 championship placements. Park looked at her steadily. He built something in you that cannot be built quickly. He built it, Emily said. I buried it. You didn't. You maintained it without maintaining it, which is its own remarkable thing. Park leaned back slightly. There are programs that develop civilian precision shooters for specialized advisory and assessment roles. Very small, very selective. The pathway is not standard, the work is not glamorous, and it requires starting from the bottom in institutional terms, regardless of demonstrated capability. She paused. But it exists, and the people who have been briefed today would like you to know it exists. Emily was quiet for a moment. Outside the administrative building window, she could see the range from where she sat. The lanes ran out toward the ridgelines in the fading afternoon light. The target frames on lane 1 were still intact, the farthest left lane, which the attack had not reached. The brass she had not finished collecting that morning was still on the range floor, glinting in the late sun. She thought about sweeping that range for 2 years. She thought about the weight of the rifle in her hands. She thought about Logan Pierce saying the highest level precision shooting I have ever personally observed, and the way she hadn't known what to do with it. "I don't know what to do with any of this yet," she said. "You don't have to," Park said. "Not today. But I need to at some point." "Yes." Emily looked at her hands on the table. "Is the program voluntary?" she said. "Entirely." "And the entry pathway? It's a formal process?" "Application, assessment, selection, same as anything else. The difference is that in your case, the preliminary assessment has essentially already occurred." Park's voice was as measured as it had been all day. "Unofficially." Emily nodded. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. Park didn't push. They sat in the quiet room while the light outside changed color, and the base around them ran its post-incident inventory, and somewhere on the southern spur of the eastern ridgeline, the wind moved through an empty hide site that would be documented and cleared by the morning. Cole found her at 17:30. She was back on the range. She had gone out after Park left, retrieved her brass bucket from where she'd left it near Lane 4's section marker, and was finishing the collection she had started at 0445. It was probably unnecessary. The range was an active investigation scene and would be cleared and documented before any shooting resumed, meaning any brass she collected today would not have been cleaned up for the sake of training operations, but simply because she had started the job and hadn't finished it. She finished jobs she started. Cole watched her from the edge of the maintenance corridor for a moment before he spoke. "You're doing your rounds," he said. "I didn't finish this morning." He came down to the corridor level and walked beside her as she moved the brass picker along the lane. "Warren wants to fast-track a formal review of your background," Cole said. "For the purpose of eligibility assessment. He said to tell you that directly." "Park already told me about the program." "Park told you about one program." Cole watched the brass picker do its work. "Warren is thinking about something different. A direct advisory attachment to a precision training command. Civilian grade, but with access and integration that a standard contractor position wouldn't have." Emily stopped moving. She turned and looked at him. "Why are you telling me this instead of Warren?" "Because Warren is going to make it sound like a bureaucratic process, and it is a bureaucratic process, but before it becomes that, I wanted you to hear it from someone who isn't," he stopped, "who isn't operating from a position of institutional interest." "And you're not?" "I am," he said. "But it's a different interest." He met her eyes. "What happened today is going to follow you regardless. The investigation, the review, the attention, that's unavoidable. What isn't decided yet is whether you're inside that process as a subject or as a participant." Emily looked at the lane markers. The flags on lane 3 were still up. They were moving in the evening wind, easy and unhurried, the same flags that had cycled in their 40-second pattern at 05:15 this morning when the world had still been quiet. "I don't want what happened today to define everything that comes next," she said. "It won't," Cole said, "unless you let it." "That's easy to say." "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "What do you think I should do?" Cole looked at her with an expression she had learned to read over 3 months of corridors and notebooks and early mornings. He was not going to tell her what to do. He had already decided not to, before she asked. "I think," he said, "that you know exactly what you should do. I think you've known it for 12 years, and you built a very functional life around not knowing it." He paused. "I think today made the not knowing impossible." She turned that over. He was right. She didn't want him to be, but he was. "The rifle," she said. "Your training rifle. The one I used today." "What about it?" "The dope card is wrong for me. The eye relief, the cheek weld, the zero, all of it is built around your dimensions, not mine." Cole looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "If I was going to shoot it again," she said, "I'd need to rebuild the dope card from scratch. New environmental baseline, new correction data, probably 300 to 400 rounds of careful work. At least. That's going to take time." "Yes," Cole said. It will. She looked at the rifle, which he was carrying on a sling at his side, the way he always carried it on the range. You'd need access to a range, she said. There's one right here. It's an active investigation scene. Investigation will be complete in 72 hours. She looked at him. He was not smiling. Cole was not a man who smiled easily. But there was something in his face that was the closest approximation of it she had seen. Carter, he said, just say yes. She looked at the rifle. She looked at the flags on lane 3, moving easily in the evening wind, cycling through their 40-second pattern, the same as they always had. I'll need different ammunition, she said. The .338 Lapua is overkill for close-range dope work. You'd want to start me on something flatter. I have a .308 platform that would work. And I'll need weather data going back 30 days for the ridge conditions. Logan has it. And I am not, she said, starting before Yo 600. I've been awake since Yo 330. Obviously, Cole said. She picked up the brass bucket. She finished the lane. She did it in silence, methodically, the way she had done it 100 mornings before this one, and Cole walked beside her without speaking, and the Nevada desert turned from orange to purple around them, and the flags on the lanes moved in the cooling air. When she finished the last section and straightened up and turned to face the range in its entirety, the damaged frames, the scarred berm, the marks on the concrete where the morning had left its evidence, something settled in her chest that had been unsettled for 12 years. Not resolution, not healing, or whatever word people used for the process of putting difficult things in their right place. Just a settling. A weight finding its correct position. She had been here all along. She had swept this range every morning for 2 years. She had watched these flags and read this wind and called these corrections in her head and put every answer in a place where nobody could ask for it. Today, somebody had asked. She picked up her bucket and walked off the range in the last of the evening light, and Mason Cole walked beside her, and neither of them said another word. And the flags on the lanes kept moving in their patient 40-second rhythm long after they were gone. She slept for 11 hours. Not well. She woke twice, once at EO 200 when a vehicle outside the contractor housing block ran its engine too long, and the sound pattern hit something in her nervous system that was still sorting out the difference between a truck and a mortar tube, and once at EO 430 when she simply surfaced into complete wakefulness and lay in the dark staring at the ceiling for 20 minutes before going back under. But the total hours were 11, and when she finally got up at 0645, her body felt like it had been processed through something mechanical and returned to her slightly rearranged. She showered, she dressed, she made coffee in the small kitchenette of the temporary contractor unit and stood at the window and looked at the eastern ridgeline in the early light. The ridgeline looked the same as it always had. She found this unsettling and then decided to stop finding it unsettling because there was nothing useful in that direction. Her phone had 17 missed messages. Walt Briggs, her supervisor at Apex Range Services, had sent 6 of them, a progression from concern to alarm to something that read like a man who had received information he didn't know what to do with. 3 were from her regional coordinator at Apex, ascending in formality. 2 were from a number she didn't recognize that turned out, when she read the message, to be a public affairs officer at Black Ridge who had been tasked with managing contractor communications post-incident. The remaining 6 were from her mother. Her mother called once a week on Sundays, and it was Thursday, which meant word had traveled through some channel Emily hadn't anticipated. The messages went from a news alert forwarded without comment to a question mark to 3 increasingly direct variations of call me, to a final message that simply said, I know you're okay, or I'd know you weren't, but call me anyway. Emily called her. Her mother answered on the second ring, which meant she had been waiting. Tell me you're fine, her mother said. I'm fine. Your voice says you're fine and something else at the same time. I'm fine and something else, Emily said. Yes. A pause. Were you... Her mother stopped. Started again. The news said a contractor was involved in stopping the attack. They didn't name anyone but the description. Mom. I know. I'm not going to... Another stop. Are you actually fine? I am. Did you... Her mother went quiet for 3 full seconds. Did you shoot? Emily looked at the ridgeline. Yes, she said. The silence on the other end of the phone was not empty. It was full of things her mother had not said out loud for 12 years, things she had watched her daughter carry without ever finding the right way to address. Emily could feel all of it through the phone line, compressed into 7 seconds of nothing. Grandpa would have, her mother started. I know, Emily said. I know he would have. Another silence, different quality. Okay, her mother said finally. Her voice had shifted. Not softer, steadier. Okay, what do you need? Right now, nothing. There are some processes happening. I'll know more in a few days. Processes. Formal reviews and investigation. Decisions I'll need to make. What kind of decisions? Emily thought about Cole saying just say yes, about Park's careful language around programs and pathways and institutional interest, about Warren's notebook and the way he had looked at her like a man encountering a category problem. I'll explain when I know more, she said. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Emily, she said. Yeah. When you were competing, before everything with me, before you stopped, you were the best I'd ever seen, and I'd watched your grandfather for 30 years. Her mother's voice was careful and deliberate, the voice of someone choosing words that have been assembled for a long time. I always thought you stopping was because of me, because of what I needed. Mom, let me finish. I thought for a long time that you gave it up for me, and that was something I carried. But I don't think that was it. I think you were ready to put it down. And what happened with me gave you a reason that felt cleaner than whatever the real reason was. A pause. Am I wrong? Emily was quiet. No, she said. You're not wrong. Okay. Her mother breathed out. Then whatever comes next, whatever these decisions are, don't make them based on what you think you owe anyone. Not me. Not his memory. She stopped. Just make them based on what you want. Emily stood at the window with her coffee going cold in her hand, and the ridgeline turning pale gold in the morning light, and she didn't say anything for a moment. That's harder than it sounds, she said. I know, her mother said. Do it anyway. The formal review board convened at 0900 in the installation's primary conference room. Emily had been informed of this at 0800 by the public affairs officer, a young captain named Sosa, who delivered information with the anxious precision of someone who knew the information mattered and was terrified of getting the delivery wrong. She was told to bring any documentation she had of her competitive shooting history, her contractor credentials, and any relevant personal identification. She brought her Apex Range Services badge, her driver's license, and a folded printout of her NSSF competitive record that she had pulled from her email archive at 0815, something she had not looked at in over a decade. The conference room held 7 people when she arrived. Helen Park, positioned to the left. Lieutenant Colonel Warren at the head of the table. A man Emily had not seen before in Navy uniform with the rank insignia of a full commander, SEAL community, she assessed from the warfare pin. 2 other individuals in civilian dress who had the look of people who worked in buildings without windows. And seated to the right and slightly back from the table in a way that communicated observer status, Mason Cole. There was 1 empty chair. Emily sat in it. Warren looked at her with the careful assessment of a man who had spent the last 18 hours reviewing a file and was now seeing the file in person for the first time. Ms. Carter, he said, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you prefer that, and because, frankly, this situation doesn't benefit from anything else. I appreciate that, she said. Yesterday's incident is being reviewed across multiple commands simultaneously. The security failure that allowed the attack to occur is one track. That investigation doesn't involve you. The second track is the incident itself, specifically the defensive engagements. That track involves you directly. He folded his hands on the table. The third track, which is why we're in this room this morning, concerns your status, your background, and what yesterday's events indicate about certain gaps in the way this installation and the programs operating on it identify and utilize available resources. Emily looked at him steadily. One of the windowless building people, a woman in her 50s named Carver, who introduced herself without a title or agency affiliation, which told Emily everything she needed to know about what agency she worked for, leaned forward slightly. I want to establish some baseline facts for the record, Carver said. You competed in long-range precision shooting from age 9 to age 20. You achieved a national ranking of 6th in the open division at your final competitive year. You then discontinued participation in the sport entirely. At no point did you serve in any military or law enforcement capacity, complete any tactical firearms training, or hold any position that involved weapons handling in an operational context. That's correct, Emily said. And prior to yesterday morning, your last trigger pull on any firearm was approximately 12 years ago. Yes. Carver wrote something. The SEAL commander, his name was Hargrove, she learned when Warren introduced the room, had been quiet since she sat down. He was in his mid-40s, sharp-faced, with the contained energy of a man who was accustomed to making fast decisions and was currently making himself wait. I have a question, Hargrove said. Go ahead, Emily said. The overwatch position, 820 meters, 4-inch exposure. Chief Cole's rifle, built and zeroed for his specific measurements, he paused. That is a shot that most qualified snipers, military-trained, experienced, zeroed on their own platform, would decline at variable wind conditions. I know, Emily said. So I want to understand the decision process, not the shooting mechanics. The decision to take the shot in the first place. Emily had answered this question yesterday, and she gave Hargrove the same honest version she had given Cole, because she sensed Hargrove was after the same thing Cole had been after, not the technical analysis, but the substrate beneath it. The alternative was doing nothing, she said. Doing nothing felt like a choice, but it wasn't. It just had a longer fuse. Explain that. If the overwatch position remained active and repositioned after we cleared the platform, Black Ridge had a precision shooter in a covered elevated position with visibility over the entire installation. QRF had just entered the wire, which means vehicle and personnel movement was going to be elevated for the next 3 to 4 hours. The overwatch shooter could have caused significant additional casualties during that period and been very difficult to locate. She paused. The shot was low probability. The alternative was a certainty of further engagement. Hargrove looked at her. That is a tactical reasoning process, he said. Yes. Where did you develop that? Emily looked at him directly. My grandfather spent a lot of time talking about why you take shots, she said. Not just how. The how is mechanics. The why is different. Hargrove absorbed that. He looked briefly at Warren, then back at her. What did he tell you? He said. He told me that the hardest part of shooting isn't the shot you take. It's knowing which shot you don't take and why, and being at peace with both decisions. She paused. He also said that a shooter who can't tell the difference between a difficult shot and an impossible one will eventually take an impossible shot and call it courage. That's not courage. That's innumeracy. A brief silence. Cole, against the wall, shifted slightly. One of the window-building people, the man who had not spoken yet, whose name she had not caught, was writing something quickly. Warren cleared his throat. The shooting record, he said. You brought documentation? She slid the printout across the table. Warren took it, passed it to Carver without looking at it, which meant he'd already seen the digital version. Carver looked at it. 6th nationally at 20, she said. Open Division. She looked up. The competitors in the top 10 of Open Division that year, 3 of them subsequently went into military service. 2 are currently serving in roles I'm not going to name in this room. She looked at Emily with an expression that had shed most of its procedural neutrality. One is on the short list for the national championships this year. I was aware of some of that, Emily said. You were on the same trajectory. I was on a trajectory. I don't know where it was going. I think we can make an informed estimate, Carver said. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Hargrove said, Ms. Carter, what do you want? The question surprised her, not because it was inappropriate. Hargrove didn't seem like a man who asked inappropriate questions, but because the directness of it landed differently than she expected. In a room full of people who were assessing her, categorizing her, building a case for or around her, the question of what she actually wanted had not come up. She took a breath. I want to understand what I'm being offered before I decide whether I want it, she said. Hargrove almost smiled. It looked like Cole's almost smile, minimal, controlled, but real. Fair, he said. Let me be specific. He leaned forward. There is a program, small, not publicized, not well-known outside a specific community, that develops civilian precision shooting specialists for advisory roles attached to training commands. The purpose is not to create operators. It is to create the kind of institutional knowledge resource that doesn't exist in sufficient quantity within the military pipeline. People who understand long-range precision shooting at an elite level and can communicate that understanding across different training contexts. He paused. The entry process is rigorous. It is not accelerated for anyone, regardless of demonstrated capability. You would start from the bottom of the institutional ladder and work up through the same evaluation process as everyone else. How long is the process? 12 to 18 months for initial qualification. Placement after that is based on evaluation results and available positions. During the process, what is my status? Civilian specialist contract. Paid with benefits. You would maintain your contractor classification, but under a different authority. And Apex Range Services? Your current contract would be suspended pending the review of your status, which begins the moment you express intent to enter the assessment program. He looked at her steadily. That is happening regardless, Ms. Carter. The review of your contractor status is not optional at this point. Yesterday's incident has made certain conversations unavoidable. She had understood this, at some level, since Park had told her the previous afternoon. The review was coming whether she invited it or not. The question was only whether she walked into it or was walked into it. And if the review concludes unfavorably, she said. For what? Hargrove said. For the assessment program, for whatever clearance level the advisory role requires. Then you would have a finding and a separation, same as anyone. He was matter of fact. But based on everything in this room, that outcome is not the likely one. Emily was quiet. Warren, who had been letting Hargrove run the conversation for the last 15 minutes, spoke. I want to address something directly, he said. There may be a perception, and I think it would be a natural perception, that what happened yesterday is why you're in this room. That we're reacting to a single incident and making decisions based on a performance under extraordinary circumstances that may not be reproducible. That thought had occurred to me, Emily said. Chief Cole's assessment of your capability over the 3 months prior to yesterday is part of the record that was reviewed this morning, Warren said. Not just yesterday, your environmental corrections on the training lanes, your wind analysis, the ballistics discrepancy you identified in December that corrected the 2,000-yard lane problem. He looked at her. Yesterday was an expression of a capability that has been documented in smaller ways for months. She looked at Cole. He was watching her with the same steady attention he had always given her. She had not known he had been documenting any of it. He had never told her. He had just watched and written in his green notebook and filed whatever he had filed. You documented my range observations, she said. I document everything relevant to the training program, Cole said. You were relevant to the training program. I was sweeping brass. You were also calling wind corrections faster than my primary spotter. You never said anything about documenting. I didn't think it would matter this soon, he said. I was building a case for later. She looked at him. A case for what? For having this conversation, he said, in a room like this, with people who could do something about it. He paused. Yesterday accelerated the timeline. Emily absorbed that. She sat with it for a moment, the idea that Cole had been building something quietly, in the background, in the same way she had been maintaining something quietly in the background, and that neither of them had said any of this out loud because neither of them was a person who said things out loud before the saying was useful. They were, she thought, annoyingly similar in that way. I have conditions, she said. The room shifted slightly. Not dramatically. These were people who did not visibly react to much, but she felt the attention sharpen. I'm listening, Hargrove said. I want to rebuild my dope work from scratch before any formal assessment. Whatever program you're describing, whatever evaluation process exists, I need to come into it having established a current baseline, not yesterday's performance under emergency conditions. A real baseline, built over enough range time to be reliable. How much time? 60 days minimum, on a platform I'm zeroed to. Hargrove looked at Warren. Warren looked at Cole. Cole said, the training rotation has 2 weeks remaining. The range will be operational again in 72 hours, investigation permitting. I can provide supervised range access and platform resources during the remaining rotation period. That's 2 weeks, Emily said, not 60 days. It's 2 weeks here, Cole said. The program Hargrove is describing has its own range facility. The 60 days could happen there. Emily considered that. Second condition, she said. I want full disclosure of what the advisory role actually involves. Not the generalized description. The specific work. Where? Doing what? For whom? Carver and the unnamed man exchanged a brief look. Some of that is classification dependent, Carver said. Then I want everything that isn't classification dependent, and I want a clear statement about what is. That's reasonable, Hargrove said. He looked at Carver. She gave a small nod. Agreed. Third condition. Emily paused. She had not planned a third condition. It arrived while she was speaking, which was either instinct or the accumulated weight of 12 years of not saying what she actually meant, finally reaching a tipping point. I want it understood, she said, that I am not a novelty. I am not a story about the maintenance contractor who turned out to be remarkable. If I enter this program, I enter it as a professional pursuing a professional evaluation, and I expect to be treated accordingly, regardless of how I came to this room. The silence that followed was 6 seconds long. Hargrove looked at her without any readable expression for 4 of those seconds. Then he said, "That is the most reasonable thing anyone has said in this room in 2 days." He extended his hand across the table. She looked at it. She shook it. Well, the practical machinery of the next 48 hours was exactly as unglamorous as Emily had expected. Her Apex Range Services contract was formally suspended at 1,500 on the day of the review board, replaced with an interim specialist contractor designation that her regional coordinator at Apex received via a document from an agency that was named in ways that told you nothing about what the agency actually did. Walt Briggs called her at 6,600. I don't entirely understand what I'm looking at, he said, but I've been in this business long enough to know what it means when paperwork arrives from certain return addresses. I'm sorry for the short notice, Walt. Don't apologize. He paused. I'm not surprised exactly. I just didn't think it would happen like this. Like what? Like a mortar attack, he said. There was something in his voice that might have been dry humor and might have been something else. I thought it would be something quieter. You thought something would happen? Emily. He said her name with the patience of a man who had watched someone be better than their job for 2 years. I've run range maintenance operations for 19 years. I have never, in 19 years, had a contractor who could call wind corrections for a 1,000-meter lane while sweeping brass. A pause. I figured eventually someone would notice. She didn't know what to say to that. Take care of yourself, he said. And if you ever need a reference for the non-classified portion of whatever this is, call me. I will, she said. Thank you, Walt. She meant it more than she could easily say. The psychological evaluation happened on the second day. It was conducted by a civilian clinical psychologist named Dr. Marsh, who worked under contract with the installation, and who approached the session with the professional neutrality of someone who had evaluated people in the aftermath of violent incidents many times and had learned to separate his own reactions from the work. Emily had expected the evaluation to feel invasive. It didn't, particularly. Marsh was good at his job. He was interested in how she was processing the experience, not in confirming or denying any predetermined conclusion. He asked about sleep, which she answered honestly. He asked about appetite and concentration and whether she had experienced any intrusive imagery. She had, twice in the first night, the image of the mortar tube between the bipod legs appearing clearly when she closed her eyes, which she reported accurately. He asked about her emotional state during the engagements, and she told him what she had told Cole, that she had not been afraid during the shots, that she had been present. He was quiet for a moment after that. That distinction matters to you, he said. Yes. Why? Because fear is a reasonable response to what happened. Not feeling fear would indicate, I don't know, a pathology. Something switched off that should be on, she paused. But being afraid and being present are different things. I was afraid beforehand. When Cole asked me if I could function, I was afraid. When I picked up the rifle, I wasn't. Why not? Because once the rifle was in my hands, there was a specific problem to solve and a specific way to solve it. Fear is what happens when you're dealing with the unknown. I wasn't dealing with the unknown. The shooting was familiar. The shooting was the most familiar thing I know, she said. In the middle of everything that was unfamiliar, it was the only familiar thing. Marsh made a note. And now? He said. In the last 48 hours? Now the fear comes back. It comes in pieces. She looked at the window. I'm okay. I believe you, Marsh said. I want you to know that it will probably get less linear before it gets more linear. That's normal. The adrenaline stabilizes the immediate experience, and then when it drops, the processing gets complicated. How complicated? Depends on the person. He looked at her directly. You have a functional approach to self-regulation. That helps. You also have a tendency to manage experience by converting it into technical analysis, which is effective short-term, but sometimes defers emotional processing rather than replacing it. She looked at him. You noticed that in one session, she said. You've described 3 significant emotional events in the last 48 hours by quantifying them, he said. The wind speed, the target distance, the time interval of the gusts. He said it without judgment, just observation. She thought about that. My grandfather taught me that, she said. When you can measure something, it belongs to you. That's a useful principle, Marsh said. It's also not the whole picture. No, she said, it's not. She left the session with a clearance notation in her file and a follow-up appointment scheduled for 3 weeks out that Marsh said was standard procedure and not a cause for concern, and she believed him because he seemed like a man who said what he meant. Cole was on the range when she arrived the following morning at 0545. He had, as promised, arranged platform access for the remaining training window. The investigation team had cleared the range in 36 hours, thorough but fast, because the range needed to be operational for the continuing SEAL rotation, and everyone understood that. The damaged sections were roped off and flagged for repair. The remaining lanes were open. He had a 308 platform waiting for her at the Lane 3 shooting position. A Remington 700 in a factory stock that had been modified slightly. She examined it and could see the bedding work, the trigger job, the adjustments that moved it from factory to functional without going all the way to custom. Someone had done careful work on it. Whose platform? She said. Mine, Cole said. I have 2. This one I use for demonstration and student evaluation. She picked it up, settled it, found the cheek weld. Better. The dimensions were closer to neutral, which meant she could build her dope without as much personal adjustment to account for. What's my zero at? She said. I zeroed it at 100 this morning, he said. Clean slate. The adjustments are yours. She looked at him. You were out here this morning zeroing a rifle for me, she said. I was out here this morning doing range prep, he said, which included zeroing a rifle. At 0400? I don't sleep much. She looked at the rifle in her hands, then at the flags on the lane, then at the ridgeline, the same ridgeline she had looked at for 2 years and looked at 2 days ago through a scope with a different weight behind her eyes. I want to run a cold bore first, she said. I expected that. She settled in. The cold bore shot. The first round through a clean, cold barrel, which behaves differently than subsequent rounds fired through a warmed-up tube, was the honest shot. The one that told you where you actually were before the system had settled into its groove. She did not rush it. She built her position from the ground up, the way her grandfather had taught her, establishing every contact point before she thought about the target. Cheek, shoulder, support hand, trigger hand, natural point of aim. She breathed. She looked at the flags. The morning wind was easy, maybe 6 knots, consistent. No cycling, no tricks. Just a clean desert morning with good light and no noise except the distant sound of a vehicle on the perimeter road. She pressed the trigger. The round hit the 100-meter target at 0.4 inches right of center. She lowered the rifle and looked at the impact through the scope. Cole behind her said nothing. She turned and looked at him. .4 right, she said. I see it. At 6 knots from the left, with this bullet weight and this barrel, that tells me, I know what it tells you, he said. He looked at her with an expression she had learned to read. Not quite admiration. Cole was too measured for something as uncomplicated as admiration. It was closer to the satisfaction of a man who had built a case and was watching the evidence confirm itself. How many rounds do you want to run today? She looked at the flags. She looked at the lane stretching out to the 500-meter mark and beyond, the familiar ground, the familiar air, the place she had moved through every morning for 2 years without ever once standing still at the firing line. As many as I have time for, she said. She settled back behind the rifle. And in the cool Nevada morning, with the range flags moving in their patient rhythm and Cole quiet at her right shoulder and the ridgeline holding its ancient, indifferent shape against the sky, Emily Carter began the work of becoming, in the full official sanctioned sense, what she had always already been. The brass would still need collecting when she was done. She had already arranged with the incoming maintenance contractor to cover her section. It was, she thought, the least she could do. She ran 240 rounds over the next 11 days. Not all at once. Cole structured it the way you structure any serious dope building process, with rest days built in to prevent the kind of accumulated fatigue that corrupts data. 20 rounds one morning, 30 the next, a rest day, then a longer session working distance increments from 300 meters out to 800. She logged every shot in a green notebook that Cole had given her without comment on the first day. A twin to his own, same brand, same size. And by the end of the first week, the notebook was half full of environmental data, impact coordinates, correction values, and the marginal notes she had always made when she was building dope, small observations about wind behavior and bullet performance that didn't fit neatly into columns but belonged somewhere. Her grandfather had kept notebooks like this. She had 3 of them at home in a box in her closet, in his handwriting. She had not opened that box in 12 years. She thought about opening it now. The shooting came back in the way she had hoped it would. Not like something retrieved, but like something resumed. There were gaps. 12 years of gaps, and she felt them. Her natural point of aim took 4 days to stabilize consistently. Her trigger control at distance had acquired a faint anticipatory flinch she had not had at 20, a small pre-fire movement that added half a minute of angle to her impact scatter at 600 meters and cost her 2 days of deliberate work to untrain. These were real problems, not minor ones, and she worked them the way her grandfather had taught her to work problems, without frustration, without rushing, with the understanding that the body responds to patient repetition and does not respond to being hurried. Cole watched. He said very little during these sessions, which she had come to understand was his version of approval. When something was wrong, he said so. When something was right, he said nothing and let the data in the notebook speak for itself. On the 9th day, she ran a full cold bore sequence at 800 meters in a variable 14-knot crosswind and put 5 consecutive rounds inside a 6-inch group. Cole looked at the target data through his spotting scope for a long moment. "That's a current service qualifying standard," he said. "I know," she said, "for military precision shooters." "I know." He looked at her from behind the scope. "How does it feel?" he said. She thought about the question honestly, the way Marsh had been teaching her to think about questions honestly, rather than converting them immediately into technical analysis. "It feels like mine," she said. Cole wrote something in his own notebook. He did not say anything else. She did not need him to. The SEAL rotation ended on a Thursday. The team had a final range day, a full qualification run, all 8 shooters, every platform and every distance in the program's assessment matrix. Emily ran her dope work in the morning before they arrived and cleared the lane by 0800. And then she stood in the maintenance corridor, out of habit, because the maintenance corridor was where she had always stood, and watched the qualification sessions run. She watched differently now than she had watched 3 months ago. Not because her eye had changed. The eye had always been what it was. But the context around the eye had changed, and that changed what she did with what she saw. 3 months ago, she had watched and filed everything silently, building a private inventory of observations that had nowhere to go. Now she understood that the observations had somewhere to go, that the somewhere was real and accessible and was going to require her to do the hard institutional work of building credibility from the ground up in a system that did not yet know what to do with her. She was ready for that. Or, more accurately, she was not ready for it and was going to do it anyway, which was, she had decided, the only honest relationship a person could have with readiness. Logan ran the qualification scoring from the platform. He moved through the session with his usual efficiency, and when the final shooter completed the last string and the numbers were tallied, he came down off the platform and found Emily in the corridor. He handed her a sheet of paper. She looked at it. It was the qualification matrix. All 8 shooters, all distances, all scores. Her name was at the top. Cole had run her through the same matrix that morning, unofficially, without telling her that was what he was doing. She had thought it was a structured dope verification session. Her score sat 14 points above the second highest mark on the sheet. "Cole told me not to tell you until after," Logan said. "Why after?" "Because he wanted to see if you'd shoot differently if you knew it was a qualification run." "Would I have?" "No," Logan said. "He knew that. That was the point." She looked at the sheet for a moment. 14 points. Above 8 military precision shooters who had spent the last 6 weeks in intensive training and were, by any reasonable standard, operating at the top of their occupational skill set. She handed the sheet back. Keep that, Logan said. It goes in your file. I have a file now? You've had a file for about 11 days, he said. It's not thin. She looked at him. Logan Pierce, who 12 days ago had carried 2 cups of coffee into a room and almost apologized for underestimating her, was looking at her now with an uncomplicated directness that had nothing of the earlier professional indifference in it. He had recategorized her, completely and without apparent difficulty, which she respected. What happens to you after this rotation? She said. Pre-deployment workup, he said. We ship out in 3 weeks. Mark Ryu, is he? He's going to be okay, won't make this deployment. Logan's jaw tightened slightly. But okay. Good, she said. She meant it. Logan looked at the range. I've been doing this job for 12 years, he said. I've worked with some very good shooters. She waited. What you did on that platform, the 3 engagements, all of it, I've run that through my head probably 30 times since it happened. He paused. I don't know a single person I've worked with who I'm confident could have done all 3. In sequence. On a borrowed rifle. First time in combat. Emily looked at the lane flags. I had a good spotter, she said. Logan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Yeah, you did. And for the first time since she had arrived at Black Ridge, Logan Pierce smiled at her. A real one. Not minimal, not controlled, just an actual human smile from a man who was allowing himself one moment of uncomplicated warmth before going back to being professional. She smiled back. It felt like something ending and something beginning at the same time, which she was learning was how most important things felt. Cole found her in the range office at 16:30. She was writing her final maintenance log, the last official document she would file under her Apex Range Services contractor designation before the transition to her new status took effect at the end of the week. It was a routine form. Range damage assessment, completed repairs, outstanding items, sign-off. She had filled out versions of this form every month for 2 years, and she was filling it out one last time, carefully, because she finished jobs she started. Cole sat down across from her and waited until she was done. She set down the pen. He had something in his hand, an envelope, standard letter size, the kind that came from official sources. The assessment program confirmation, he said, and slid it across the table. She looked at the envelope. Did not pick it up yet. The 60 days start when? She said. 3 weeks from Monday. The facility is in Utah. High desert, which you know. Longer lanes than here. They run out to 1,500 meters. 1,500. You'll be fine. She looked at him. You don't know that, she said. No, he agreed. But I've watched you work for 2 weeks, and I have an informed opinion. She picked up the envelope, turned it over, did not open it. I want to ask you something, she said. Go ahead. The notebook, the documentation you were building. You said you were building a case for later. She paused. How long had you been building it? Cole was quiet for a moment. I wrote the first entry 6 weeks after you arrived, he said. November, the morning you called the berm gap on lane 4. She absorbed that. That was 8 months ago, she said. Yes. You documented my range observations for 8 months without telling me. Yes. Why didn't you say anything? He looked at the table, then at her. It was the look of a man who was going to say something honest that he would have preferred not to have to say. Because you weren't ready, he said, and I didn't think pushing you would help. You needed to get there on your own. You couldn't know that. No, he said. It was a judgment call. I might have been wrong. If the attack hadn't happened, I was going to say something at the end of this rotation anyway. The timeline just accelerated, she said. Yes. She set the envelope down on the table between them. Mason, she said. He looked at her. She had used his first name twice in 3 months. Both times it had been because what she needed to say required more than a last name. Thank you, she said, for seeing it before I could. He was quiet for a moment. You would have gotten there, he said. Maybe, but you made it shorter. She paused. That matters. Cole picked up the envelope and held it out to her. She took it. She opened it. The document inside was exactly what he had described. confirmation of enrollment in the Civilian Specialist Assessment Program, start date, facility location, point of contact. The formal language of institutional processes rendered in bureaucratic prose. That was the opposite of everything that had led to this moment, and was also, she understood, exactly how important things got made real. She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her jacket pocket. Okay, she said. Okay, Cole said. Okay. They sat in the range office for another minute without speaking, and the desert light came through the single window at its late afternoon angle. And somewhere on the range a flag was moving in the wind, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with anything. Whoopch. She drove off Black Ridge on a Friday morning. Her truck was packed in the same way it had been packed when she arrived. Efficiently, without sentiment, everything in its place. She had said goodbye to Walt Briggs by phone the night before. She had left her maintenance logs neatly filed in the range office, organized by month and lane section, because the incoming contractor would need them, and she was not going to leave a mess for whoever came next. She was 2 miles down the access road when she pulled over. She didn't know why she pulled over. She had not planned to. But something made her stop the truck and get out and stand on the shoulder of the road in the cold morning air and look back at the installation. From 2 miles out, Black Ridge was small. A cluster of structures in the middle of an enormous desert, ringed by ridge lines that looked indifferent and ancient and utterly unchanged by everything that had happened among them. The eastern ridge was the same color it was every morning at this hour. The southern spur, she found it automatically, the way her eye always found the relevant terrain feature, was just rock and shadow in the early light. She stood there for a full minute. She was not being sentimental. She was not trying to memorize the view or mark the moment. She was doing something more specific. She was looking at the place where the distance between who she had been and who she was going to be had collapsed into a single morning. You could not see the gap in the eastern berm from here. You could not see the mortar damage on the range, or the repaired target frames, or the lane where the flags cycled in their 40-second pattern. You could not see any of it. You could just see the desert, which did not care about any of it, and never had. She got back in the truck. She drove. The assessment facility in Utah was called Copper Ridge Training Center, and it sat in a high valley between two ranges of mountains that turned orange in the fall and white in the winter, and were brown and dry most of the rest of the time. The facility was small. 12 personnel in the current assessment cohort, 3 instructors, a small support staff, and a range complex that was, as Cole had said, significantly larger than anything she had worked on at Black Ridge. She arrived on a Sunday afternoon. The intake process was routine: paperwork, a facility orientation, assignment to a housing unit, introduction to the cohort. Her cohort was 11 men and 1 woman, ages ranging from 26 to 41, backgrounds including military, law enforcement, and 1 other civilian who had come up through the competitive shooting world. All of them were skilled. Several of them were very skilled. None of them knew anything about her beyond her name and her incoming documentation. She preferred it that way. On the first morning, the lead instructor, a retired Army warrant officer named Decker, who had the compressed intensity of a man who had been doing exactly this work for exactly this long and was not interested in performing anything, gathered the cohort on the range for what he called an orientation shoot. "First round at the 100, Decker said. Cold bore, no prep, no warm-up. I want to see what you brought with you." He walked down the line. 12 people settled in behind their assigned platforms. Emily was at position 7, a 308 that she had been assigned based on her incoming documentation. She had spent 40 minutes the previous evening reviewing the platform, checking the bedding, the trigger weight, the scope adjustment range. It was not her Black Ridge rifle. It was a different rifle, and she would need to learn it from the ground up, and that was fine. That was the job. Decker called the line. 12 shots. When the smoke cleared, Decker walked the line reviewing targets through his spotting scope. He moved methodically. Did not comment. Reached position 7. He was quiet for 3 seconds. "Carter," he said. "Sir?" "Point of impact." 0.2 inches left of center, she said. "At 100 meters on a cold barrel I've never fired, with a 0 I don't know yet, that tells me I'm looking at a left side bias in the bedding, or my natural point of aim is compensating for something in my grip that I need to correct." Decker looked at her. "Which is it?" he said. She considered. "Probably the grip," she said. "I adjusted my hand position for the trigger weight. This trigger is heavier than my last platform. The adjustment is pulling me left. What's your correction? Light side thumb pressure on the pistol grip. Reduce my trigger finger contact point by about a quarter inch. Run 5 rounds. Check the result. Decker looked at the target for another moment. Then he moved on down the line without another word. The man at position 8, former military, late 30s, the kind of person who moved through space with the efficient confidence of someone who had been very good at something for a long time, glanced at her. "Are you a competitor?" he said quietly. "Former," she said. "What level?" "National." He absorbed that. "When?" 12 years ago. He looked at her for a moment. "And you've been doing what since?" "Range maintenance," she said. He turned back to his target. She watched his face work through the information. The same slight recalibration she had seen in Logan Pierce and Deshaun Harris, and half a dozen people over the last 3 weeks who had encountered the distance between what she looked like and what she was. "Huh," he said finally. "Yeah," she said. She turned back to her own target. She made the grip adjustment. She ran 5 rounds. The group moved to center and tightened to just under an inch at 100 meters on an unfamiliar platform with a trigger she was still learning. She wrote the adjustment in her green notebook. She had a long way to go and she knew it. She was looking forward to every inch of it. The letter from her mother arrived in the 3rd week. Not a message, an actual letter, handwritten on the light blue stationery her mother had used for as long as Emily could remember. The same paper she had used to write to Emily's grandfather before he died. The letter was not long. It said that her mother had found something while going through a storage closet. A notebook, green, the same brand as the ones her grandfather had always used. The last notebook, the one from his final year of coaching, which her mother had thought was lost. It had been in a box behind some old equipment cases, and her mother had almost donated the whole box without opening it, but something had made her look. Her mother wrote that the last entry in the notebook was dated 14 months before her grandfather died. It was, her mother said, about Emily. She had copied it out and enclosed it with the letter. Emily read the copied entry. It was short. "E was here this weekend. She doesn't know that she's at the beginning of something. She thinks she's in the middle of it, or even at the end. She's 19, and at 19 everything feels like it's already in progress. She can't see the shape of it yet." I don't tell her. You can't tell a person the shape of their own life. You can only try to build in them what they'll need when they get there. She sees the air. I've never said this to anyone, but she's the best I've ever trained, the best I've ever seen at this age. Whatever she does with it, whatever she decides, it belongs to her completely. I just helped her find it. I hope she finds it again if she ever puts it down. Emily read the entry twice. She folded the letter. She sat on the edge of her bunk in the Copper Ridge housing unit with the folded letter in her hands and the green notebook on the desk and the Utah mountains visible through the window in the last light of the afternoon, and she stayed there for a long time without doing anything. She was not crying. She was not quite not crying. She was in the space between those things that doesn't have a precise name, the space where something that has been held at a careful distance finally arrives. She let it arrive. She sat with it until it had said everything it needed to say, and then she put the letter in the notebook, not tucked between pages, but inside the front cover, where she would see it every time she opened it, and she closed the notebook and set it on the desk. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked up her jacket and went out to the range because she had 2 hours of light left and the wind in this valley was doing something interesting at the 600-meter mark that she wanted to document before the conditions changed. She had work to do, son. 6 months later, the winter had broken over Copper Ridge, and the valley was running between cold mornings and warm afternoons. The kind of transition weather that made long-range shooting technically interesting because the density altitude changed significantly between the first session and the last. Emily had learned to love this weather. She had completed her formal assessment at week 14, 4 weeks ahead of the cohort average, and had been moved into the advanced track, which involved more complex environmental scenarios and a significant increase in the advisory and instructional component. Decker had told her this in the same neutral way he told everyone things, as a logistical fact rather than a compliment. She had accepted it the same way. The man from position 8, his name was Torres, had become, over 6 months, something that was not quite a friend and not quite a colleague, but was the category of person you trusted to tell you when your position had a flaw that you couldn't see yourself. He was very good. She learned things from watching him. He learned things from watching her. This was, she had decided, the correct relationship between people who were both serious about the same discipline. A message came through on a Tuesday from Cole. Not official. A personal message, brief, the kind he sent every few weeks. Range condition updates from Black Ridge. Occasional notes about how the new maintenance contractor was handling the brass collection, which was apparently not as efficiently as Emily had. This message had something else at the end. Mark Ryu is back in the program. He asked me to tell you something. He said, "Tell the woman who held my lane that I've got it back now." I don't know if that means anything to you. Emily read the message. She set her phone down. She looked at the range. It meant that Mark Ryu, whose lane she had picked up the morning the base came apart, whose injured absence had put a rifle in her hands, was back on his feet, back behind glass, back in the work he had built his life around. It meant the lane had been held until he could take it back. She thought about that for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and typed back, "Tell him I'm glad. And tell him the brass on lane 3 still runs low on Tuesdays. Someone should keep an eye on it." She sent the message. She went back to work. On the last day of the assessment period, Decker gathered the cohort one final time on the range. He did not give a speech. Decker was not a speech person. He handed each participant a summary document, assessment results, formal classification, placement recommendation, and he walked the line and shook each person's hand, and that was the ceremony. When he reached Emily, he shook her hand and held it for 1 extra second. "Highest composite in this cohort," he said. "Quiet, factual. Second highest in the program's history." "Who's first?" she said. "Instructor on staff here," he said. "He'll tell you himself." He moved on. Emily looked at her document. The placement recommendation was specific. Civilian Precision Shooting Specialist, Advisory Attachment, Training Command West. The role Hargrove had described in the Black Ridge conference room, rendered now in official language with an official start date and an official address. She folded the document. She put it in her jacket pocket, next to the letter from her mother that she had moved there 2 months ago when the notebook had started to feel too impersonal. She looked at the range one last time. 1,500-meter lane, longest she had ever worked. The target at the far end was a small dark square against the brown mountain face. She had hit it, on her best day, 9 times in 10 at full distance in a variable crosswind with an environmental profile she'd never seen before. The 10th round had pulled 4 inches right because she had blinked at the wrong moment, and she had written it down in the notebook and corrected for it, and she would correct for it again the next time because that was the work. The work was never finished. It only continued and got better and asked more of you, and you gave it more, and somewhere in that exchange you became the thing you had always been trying to be. She walked off the range. Torres fell into step beside her. "Advisory attachment," he said. He had looked at her document on the way past. "Yes," she said. "Good." He looked straight ahead. "You'll be good at the advisory part." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because you explain things like someone who remembers not knowing them," he said. "That's rarer than the shooting." She walked beside him in the cool mountain air, and the range fell away behind them, and somewhere out on the 1,500-meter lane. The wind was moving through the target frames in a pattern she could have read with her eyes closed. She did not look back. She had learned that already. The only direction that mattered was the one you hadn't gone yet. The greatest waste in the world is not the talent that is lost. It is the talent that was always there, quietly doing the work.